The Bible states that the flood destroyed all flesh on earth, but centuries later, giants appear again. How is it possible that the Nephilim have returned if they were supposedly annihilated by the waters of divine judgment? This contradiction has troubled theologians for millennia, and the answer could change everything we think we know. Before the flood, the sons of God descended to earth and took the daughters of men as wives. From this forbidden union were born the Nephilim, beings of colossal stature who dominated the antediluvian world. Genesis chapter 6 describes how these giants filled the earth with violence and extreme corruption. God saw that human wickedness was great and that every intention of their heart was continually only evil. Then he decided to send the flood to wipe out both men and Nephilim from the face of the earth. Noah was the only righteous man found in his generation, perfect in his genealogies, according to the original Hebrew text. God commanded him to build an ark to preserve his family and representatives of each animal species. The waters covered even the highest mountains, and every living being that breathed air perished beneath the waters. The destruction was total and absolute. No terrestrial creature survived outside the ark, according to the biblical account. However, something inexplicable happens just 400 years after the flood in the narrative of the scriptures. When the Israeli spies explore the land of Canaan, they return terrified, speaking of giants. In Numbers 13, the explorers declare having seen the sons of Anak, descendants of the Nephilim. They claim to feel like locusts compared to the gigantic stature of those beings that inhabited that land. If all the Nephilim died in the flood, where did these new giants mentioned in Canaan come from? This question has divided biblical scholars into two fields, with radically different theories about the origin. The first theory holds that there was a second incursion of fallen angels after the Great Flood. According to this interpretation, the sons of God mingled again with human women, creating a new generation. The apocryphal book of Enoch suggests that 200 watcher angels descended to Mount Hermon with forbidden intentions. These rebellious celestial beings would have taught humans hidden knowledge of magic, war, and astrology. The subsequent union with women would have generated new Nephilim, explaining the presence of post-diluvian giants. This theory is supported by biblical references about angels who did not keep their original dignity. Jude chapter 6 mentions angels who left their own dwelling and are kept in eternal chains. However, this interpretation raises complex theological questions about angelic free will after the judgment. Why would the fallen angels make the same mistake that had already resulted in catastrophic punishment? Some ancient texts suggest that different factions of rebellious angels operated with distinct strategies. While some were immediately chained, others would have remained free to continue their corruption agenda. The second theory proposes something even more disturbing. Some Nephilim or their descendants survived the flood itself. Genesis 6:13 says that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward. The Hebrew expression, "and also later," has intrigued translators for centuries due to its deliberate temporal ambiguity. Could it mean that some Nephilim continued to exist even after the catastrophic event of the flood? A controversial possibility suggests that one of Noah's sons or their wives carried contaminated genetics. The Bible emphasizes that Noah was perfect in his generations, but it does not make the same statement about others. If any of the wives of Noah's sons had Nephilim ancestry, the giant genes would have crossed. This theory would explain why Canaan, the son of Ham, was specifically cursed after the incident in the tent. Some ancient rabbinical texts suggest that the curse was related to a pre-existing genetic corruption in that lineage. The Canaanites, descendants of Ham, were precisely those who inhabited the land where the later giants appeared. Og, king of Bashan, is described as the last of the Rephaim, with an iron bed 4 meters long. Goliath of Gath was 6 cubits and a span tall, approximately 3 meters in height according to ancient measurements. These were not isolated cases, but entire families of giants that dominated specific regions of Canaan. Deuteronomy mentions the Emim, the Zamzumim, and the Anakim as peoples of gigantic stature and military power. The divine order to completely exterminate the Canaanites takes on a different meaning under this genetic perspective. It was not simply territorial conquest, but the elimination of a corruption that threatened divine creation once again. Joshua and the Israelites had to completely destroy these contaminated lines to preserve the purity of humanity. David and his brave men killed several Philistine giants, suggesting that the problem persisted for generations. The texts specifically mention Isbi Benob, Saph, Goliath, and a tall man with 6 fingers on each limb. This polydactyly extra fingers repeatedly appears in descriptions of giants, suggesting specific genetic markers. Some Jewish traditions claim that Og of Bashan managed to survive the flood by clinging to the outside of the ark. According to these accounts, Noah would pass food to him through an opening, but never allowed him to enter completely. This extra-canonic narrative attempts to explain how such an ancient giant could exist centuries after the flood. There is also a lesser-known third theory that involves technologically advanced pre-Diluvian genetic manipulation. The Book of Enoch describes how the fallen angels taught seed manipulation and unnatural crossbreeding. If the antediluvians mastered primitive biotechnology, they could have preserved genetic material in some unknown way. This interpretation connects with global myths about advanced civilizations destroyed by cataclysms, but that left knowledge behind. Sumerians, Egyptians, and Mesoamerican cultures speak of tall beings who brought wisdom after great worldwide floods. The pyramids, megaliths, and cyclopean structures suggest construction capabilities that exceed normal human strength. Could these monuments be physical evidence of the existence of beings with superhuman strength and knowledge? Baalbek in Lebanon contains stones weighing over 800 tons, placed with incomprehensible millimeter precision. Puma Punku in Bolivia features diorite blocks cut with perfect angles that are impossible without advanced technology. These ancient sites challenge conventional explanations about the capabilities of primitive societies without modern tools. The Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, translates Nephilim as giants, using the word giants. But the Hebrew term Nephilim derives from Nephal, which means fallen, or those who make others fall. This suggests that their nature was not simply physical stature, but a spiritual condition of rebellion. They were fallen because they descended from rebellious angels and caused others to fall into sin and violence. The connection between the physical and the spiritual in these beings represents a corruption in multiple dimensions. Some Jewish apocalyptic texts claim that the spirits of the dead Nephilim became demons. These disembodied spirits would wander, causing oppression and possession, explaining the subsequent increase in demonic activity. The Book of Enoch details that the Nephilim had an extremely long life, with some living more than 500 years. Their appetite was insatiable. They consumed all human production, and when it ran out, they began to devour humanity. This apocalyptic description paints a picture of horror where giant predators completely dominated human populations. The violence was not only physical but also spiritual, corrupting every aspect of the antediluvian civilization. Genesis mentions that the Nephilim were the renowned men of antiquity, possibly the heroes of ancient mythologies. Hercules, Gilgamesh, the Greek titans, and demigods from various cultures could be distorted memories of real Nephilim. Global mythological narratives share common elements of hybrid divine human beings with supernatural strength and extreme longevity. These parallels suggest a collective memory of real events that were later mythologized according to each culture. The epic poem of Gilgamesh, predating many biblical texts, describes a king of gigantic stature and colossal strength. Gilgamesh was 2/3 god and 1/3 human, a description that perfectly matches the hybrid nature of the Nephilim. His quest for immortality and his encounter with the survivor of the flood reflect themes identical to those in the biblical narrative. The spiritual warfare of the Old Testament may be connected to the consequences of the original angelic rebellion. The prophets constantly faced not only human enemies, but also spiritual forces that operated behind pagan empires. Daniel chapter 10 describes demonic princes over earthly kingdoms, suggesting a complex territorial spiritual hierarchy. These organized spiritual powers could be the same fallen angels that initiated the Nephilim corruption millennia ago. Satan's strategy has always been to corrupt the human genealogical line to thwart the divine plan. If he managed to genetically contaminate all of humanity, God's original purpose would theoretically be rendered impossible. The flood was necessary to preserve a pure human lineage that would maintain the divine image intact. Noah represented the last hope of preserving the essence of what it truly means to be human without corruption. That is why the text emphasizes its genealogical perfection, not only its moral rectitude, but also its complete genetic integrity. The reappearance of giants after the flood represented a second attempt to sabotage the divine plan of redemption. The prophets of the Old Testament frequently denounced the mixing of Israel with Canaanite nations as an abomination. It was not cultural xenophobia, but protection against a contamination that could be both spiritual and physical. The prohibition of mixed marriages had dimensions that go beyond simple religious or cultural differences. Ezra and Nehemiah enforced mass divorces when they discovered that Israelites had married foreign women. This extreme severity suggests that they understood something about these unions that we have completely forgotten. The Dead Sea Scrolls contain fragments of the Book of Giants that dramatically expand the Nephilim narrative. They describe how these beings had prophetic dreams about their imminent destruction in the coming flood. Some texts suggest that the Nephilim knew their fate, but were unable to repent or change. Their hybrid nature placed them in a category with no possible redemption, neither completely human nor completely angelic. This intermediate condition explains why there was no provision for their salvation in Noah's Ark. Only pure humanity could be preserved. Hybrids were destined for inevitable and total destruction. The trial was so thorough that even the bodies of the Nephilim were erased almost without a trace. However, oral traditions from global cultures preserve the memory of giants and beings that are half divine and half human. Greeks spoke of Titans and Nephilim, Nordics of Jotun, Hindus of Asuras, all with surprisingly similar characteristics. The Polynesians have legends of Tiki, giant beings who built the massive statues of Easter Island. Native Americans preserve stories of a race of red-haired giants who were eventually exterminated by normal tribes. These transcultural coincidences suggest a real historical event that was remembered and mythologized differently by each civilization. The universal flood appears in more than 200 cultures with specific details that astonishingly coincide. A just man, a boat, preserved animals, trial for moral corruption, and a new beginning for humanity. The persistence of these accounts in societies without mutual contact validates the historicity of the fundamental biblical event. If the flood was real, then the prior existence of Nephilim must also be considered historically plausible. Archaeological findings of unusually tall skeletons have been reported but rarely officially studied. Photographs of 19th century excavations show bones that significantly exceed normal human proportions. A report from 1876 by the New York Times described the discovery of 3-meter skeletons. Spanish explorers in the 16th century documented encounters with giant natives in Argentine Patagonia. The Cardiff giant, although later exposed as a hoax, generated massive interest precisely because it confirmed existing beliefs. The modern scientific community generally dismisses these findings as frauds or misinterpretations of animal remains. However, the consistency of historical reports from multiple continents deserves serious investigation without academic biases. Archaeological institutions steer clear of this topic as it questions established evolutionary theories and accepted historical narratives. Admitting the possibility of ancient giants would require reconsidering chronologies and fundamental theories about human development. The suppression of uncomfortable evidence has occurred before when findings contradict established dominant scientific consensuses. The Nephilim represent a problematic intersection between science, history, theology, and what we consider possible. Were they simply tall humans due to different environmental conditions in the antediluvian world? The pre-diluvian atmosphere may have had higher barometric pressure and oxygen concentration, allowing for greater growth. Some creationist scientists propose that a canopy of atmospheric water created conditions for a global hyperbaric chamber. This would explain both the extreme longevity of antediluvian patriarchs and the possibility of gigantic growth. Do the Nephilim represent something more disturbing? A direct intervention of dimensional entities in human genetics? The answer we accept defines our worldview about the nature of reality and history. If fallen angels truly materialized and procreated with humans, the implications are completely revolutionary. It would mean that the supernatural can intervene directly in the natural in ways that science does not recognize. The philosophical materialism that dominates modern academia collapses in the face of the possibility of interdimensional beings operating. That is why this topic generates such visceral rejection in secular academic circles beyond the evidential debate. It's not just about big bones. It's about whether the universe operates solely according to natural laws. The Nephilim question forces us to confront whether there are spiritual realities that directly impact the physical world. The fallen angels, according to ancient texts, possessed knowledge that transcended the human understanding of that time. They taught advanced metallurgy, astronomy, cosmetology, enchantments and manipulation of natural forces considered magical. This forbidden knowledge artificially accelerated technological development without the corresponding spiritual maturity to handle it. The antediluvian civilization may have reached technological levels comparable to or superior to modern societies. Its complete destruction in the flood erased almost all trace of these advancements, forcing humanity to start anew. The post-diluvian patriarchs lived for centuries but with decreasing longevity, possibly due to dramatic environmental changes. Noah lived 950 years, his son Shem 600, but Abraham barely 175 years. This progressive decrease suggests that the conditions of the post-Diluvian world were fundamentally different and less favorable. If the atmosphere changed, the giant Nephilim genetics would also face limitations that would eventually reduce their presence. The last giants mentioned in the Bible appeared during the reign of David, approximately 1,000 years before the Common Era. After that time, references to beings of extraordinary height almost completely disappear from historical records. Did they go extinct naturally, or were they systematically eliminated for being considered existential threats to normal humanity? The divine orders to Israel to completely destroy certain Canaanite populations explicitly included the descendants of the Nephilim. This war of extermination was not arbitrary genocide, but a surgical elimination of contaminated genetic lines. The mandate of Harem, total destruction, specifically applied to cities where the sons of Anak lived. Israel was to act as an instrument of divine judgment, completing what the flood had begun centuries earlier. However, the Israelites did not fully obey these orders, allowing some groups to survive in coastal cities. The Philistines, who later produced Goliath and other giants, were descendants of populations that should have been eliminated. This failure to fully follow divine instructions resulted in ongoing problems for Israel for generations. The persistent presence of giants became a constant thorn, threatening militarily and corrupting spiritually. David, being the youngest of his brothers, was specifically chosen to face the most feared giant of Philistia. His victory over Goliath was not just a military triumph, but a prophetic act of spiritual cleansing. Each defeated giant represented the ongoing elimination of the genetic corruption that had begun before the flood. The children of God who initiated this corruption were acting in direct rebellion against the created order. Genesis establishes that each species must reproduce according to its kind, maintaining clear barriers between created categories. The mixing of angelic beings with humans violated this fundamental principle, creating hybrid abominations. This transgression was not an accident, but a deliberate strategy to irreversibly corrupt divine creation. The fallen angels knew exactly what they were doing and the catastrophic consequences that would result. Her motivation was a multifaceted rebellion against divine order, a lust for forbidden physical experiences, and sabotage of the redemptive plan. By corrupting human genetics, they sought to make it impossible for a pure line to emerge from which redemption could come. Each Nephilim born represented a step closer to the complete annihilation of true humanity. God did not send the flood whimsically, but as a last resort when pollution reached critical levels. The text says that all flesh had corrupted its way upon the earth, suggesting universal pollution. Only Noah and his immediate family maintained complete genetic integrity, making catastrophic intervention inevitable. The Ark was not just a rescue boat, but a genetic bank preserving the original creation. Each pair of animals represented the preservation of species in their original pure form, without manipulation. After the flood, God established a covenant with Noah, promising never again to destroy the earth with water. However, prophetic texts warn that a final judgment will come, this time by fire, not by water. The destruction will be even more complete, leaving nothing of the current creation except what is transformed. The Nephilim, whether completely extinct or existing in spiritual form, face this inevitable final judgment. There is no escape or redemption possible for the hybrids that emerged from the original angelic rebellion. Her very existence was an affront to the divine order, an abomination with no place in the restored creation. That is why apocalyptic texts describe them as being cast eternally into the abyss, prepared for the devil and his angels. The lake of fire was not originally created for humans, but for angelic beings who rebelled. The Nephilim, as a product of that rebellion, share the fate of their fallen angelic progenitors. So, did the Nephilim survive the flood in some physical, genetic, or spiritual form that continues to affect us today? Biblical and extra-biblical evidence suggests that their presence continued post-flood, but their gradual extinction was inevitable. The last physical giants disappeared millennia ago, but their spiritual legacy persists in the ongoing cosmic war. The fallen angels that begot them remain active, seeking to corrupt and destroy everything that God loves. But his time is limited, and his final defeat is prophesied in texts that have proven to be reliable. The story of the Nephilim is not merely an ancient curiosity, but a warning about spiritual realities present today. The forces that created antediluvian giants still operate, albeit perhaps in more subtle ways in our era. Modern genetic manipulation may be repeating the mistakes that once required a global deluge judgment. We must understand the past to avoid repeating the sins that nearly destroyed humanity completely. The days of Noah were days of total corruption, extreme violence, and inevitable judgment that came suddenly. The prophetic signs suggest that we are approaching conditions similar to those that will again require divine intervention. If these ancient mysteries fascinate you and you want to uncover more hidden truths in the scriptures, subscribe now. Every week, we reveal biblical secrets that will transform your understanding of history, prophecy, and the spiritual world that surrounds us.